Okay. Hello, everyone. My name's Kyle Bishop. I'm with Public Consulting Group, and we want to thank you for joining the third session of our Forum for Student Mental Health. Our topic today is going to be isolation connections and the assessment of youth during the COVID-19 crisis, and our presenter is going to be John Van Dreal. Just a couple housekeeping and announcements. We do want to thank all our presenters. This is the third of our 6-part series. Anyone who is interested, who is not already on our list for the remaining series, feel free to reach out to me, kbishop@pcgus.com, and I'll be happy to forward you the additional invites. Just wanted to do a quick notice. None of the speakers are paid or compensated by PCG. We're all volunteering our time and expertise towards improving student lives. So we really want to just say a thank you to all our past, current, and future presenters for taking time out of their day to speak on this important topic.
Hey, I just wanted to clear real quick before I got to hop on with Hawkins here in a minute, but
just to kind of show the upcoming sessions. So we had 3 sessions. We're going to have another one coming up on July 8th with Portland Public Schools. And then we have a remote crisis intervention coming the end of July and a town hall on student mental health billing and reimbursement at the start of August. So a couple exciting topics to kind of round out our 6-part series coming just down the pipeline. Okay. I'm going to introduce. Go ahead, Dan.
Hi, everybody. This is Dan Wisman. I'm a manager at Public Consulting Group, and I currently run our solutions practices for threat assessment. It's my pleasure to introduce John Van Dreal today. I met John about a year ago at a Texas conference on school safety, and learned a lot about his view of threat assessment in the past year. John is a 30-year teacher, school psychologist. As I think the introductions and invites indicated, he's with the Salem-Keizer School District in Oregon. Salem-Keizer is one of the top 3 districts there in Oregon. And over 20 years ago, he started developing an approach to threat assessment that was, based on, some of the key foundation work that was going on, by the Secret Service and the FBI and some other researchers in the field. And, over the years, John has essentially become their peer in as an expert in this area. There's something about his approach which is truly different from the other approaches we've been working with across the country. There is it's rooted in education, in K-12 education. It's essentially developed by an educator for educators. So he's cognizant of the vocabulary of a school district. There's a second element that's truly unique, which is the context of the community. There's some fabulous community resources in law enforcement and juvenile justice, community mental health, social services that he brings into this formal process of assessing student risk. And the third key and unique element to John's approach is the concept that it's not just threats to others. It's just not about active shooters, but it's also about threats to self, suicide prevention, and sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, and fire setting, arson in schools. So he brings this all into a very comprehensive approach that's accessible to your common teacher, principal, administrator. And so with that, very happy to have John with us today. I think you'll learn a lot and go forward with questions answered and new things to consider. Thank you. Okay, John.
All right. Hello, everyone. It's good to be here. Thank you for that introduction, Dan. I'm going to share my screen and get the slides started. So while I do that, I'm hoping it works. Here we go. Did it work? I don't think it did. Let's try again. Do you have my screen up?
It works.
We see it right now. Yep.
Oh, good. Okay. Now, you have questions and reflections up right now?
Yep.
Yes, we do.
Okay. Unfortunately, I apologize, but again, I tend to jinx these things, and I am going to share it again. Let's try it. I think I picked the wrong one. Not working. Sorry about this.
Okay.
Unfortunately. You know, we had this down, guys. I somehow have messed it up. So
We'll get there.
how's that? Do you have the slide?
Not yet.
You do not have slides moving right now. All right.
We don't see any slides currently.
Well, let's try this one. Anything?
No.
Yeah, apologies. I have, I'm just going to keep hitting them until they work.
It's the last slide.
And it's what the problem that I'm having right now is they won't advance. And,
you know what we could do? You know, Kyle, you could just run it.
I can present it, yeah, if you want to speak to it, and I'll share it for you, John.
Okay. What about now? You got anything advancing up there?
We do.
Yeah.
Is it working? Oh my
Yes.
God. Okay.
Yes,
Okay. Well, look at that.
Right.
Just when I was about to give up, you should have
There it
a
is.
flow chart. Is that correct?
Yes.
We see it.
That's awesome. That's just fantastic. Okay, here we go. To the audience, I apologize for that. I noticed a few names in the audience of people who are colleagues of mine, so they are well aware that when I get near technology, I tend to jinx it, and that just happened. So apologies to everyone. Anyway, what we're going to do today in the next 55 minutes, 50 minutes is we're going to take a look at some things you can think about while your students are disconnected and through the COVID conditions, sitting in isolation. And also what you can do when the fall starts and we're looking at hybrid systems of reentry into education. So we'll have all these kind of different ways of interacting with students, from being present with them, which is what we're used to, all the way to well checks and trying to keep track of them and support them and support their parents through isolation. I mean, there is the chance that we could go back to a fall that is basically distance learning. So what I want to do is talk about 5 takeaways today, things to think about, things you can do, ways you can assess kids who are either thinking of hurting themselves or others. And these are all assessment risk factors that can be identified through open source, social media, wellness checks, just talking with parents and friends. Basically the same kinds of methods you would use if you have kids in your school, but it's just a little bit harder in that they are home and you don't have their carbon entity in front of you. You have to collect this information either electronically, which is difficult, I get, or through telephone calls or Teams meetings. So I want to give you 5 takeaways today. We're going to break for questions at a third and at 2/3 the way through this presentation, and we'll have some time at the end. I hope to be able to get to everyone's questions. If not, I think the PCG folks do have my email and or my website they can give you. I don't think it was on the title slide, but we'll make sure that you folks can reach out. And I do answer emails and phone calls. I'm happy to talk about greater detail on some of these topics. But let's get started. So I'm going to be speaking to you from the perspective of what is called the Salem-Keizer Model. And I am also going to call this the Cascade Model. So while it is used by the Salem-Keizer School District, and it was pioneered by the Salem-Keizer School District, I've been working there for almost 30 years. It is a model that has been thoroughly adopted throughout the Northwest, as well as other parts of the country. Like, we could call it the Oklahoma model, because districts in Oklahoma are adopting it. It is the San Joaquin Valley model. There are districts in the San Joaquin Valley, California. But right now we'll call it the Salem-Keizer model and the Cascade model. And it's real simple. This is a model that is two-tiered. One tier, I don't know if you can see my arrow or not, but I should. Hopefully that works. One tier is a level.
We see your arrow.
You can see it? Excellent. So I'm pointing to a green box, and that box is a site-based assessment team that is housed in a school or a school site. It's housed where there are students, all right? And the people that are noted within that box are trained in this system to look at suicide prevention, behavioral threat assessment, and other issues where students are at risk, either behaviorally or emotionally. They are trained to engage a protocol that has the kinds of questions noted on it that would be necessary in gathering information quickly, and then implementing a prevention system to keep the situation from escalating or getting worse. However, if they're stuck or they need more resources or more expertise, we move over to this yellow box, and the yellow box is a community team. And these are the folks that serve youth in public agencies, and they support and oversee the student threat assessment teams within the schools, but they also provide resources and further assessment and expertise. These are the folks that, if not have threat assessment and suicide prevention as a large feature of their career, they supervise people that do. So you have this two-tiered system that's set up with leading practice questions and protocols and interviews and intervention strategies. It's a collaborative, multidisciplinary system. Obviously, up here at the top, we have law enforcement track. That is not only for criminal investigation, but that is so that law enforcement can be a part of our teams and use their investigative method for prevention. So I'm going to say that again. Cops doing prevention. The vast majority, 95% plus of these cases, do not end up in an arrest or a referral to the juvenile system. If this system is working correctly, it is preventing things from getting to that point. And where the law enforcement participation is so crucial is in avoiding ending up in arrest, unless it's necessary to keep people safe. We like to think of this as a prevention model. So the police are involved on the prevention team, as well as within their own professional trajectory of doing criminal investigation if there is a conspiracy to commit murder or a crime that has been committed that needs to be referred. All right, so that's the basic flow chart and the foundation of the system. You can see there's intervention at every step, referral to community resources. There are collaborative decisions if we go to the pink box at every step. Out the gate, when there's a concern, we jump to collaborative discussion. Okay, so that's our backdrop. I want to tell you there is a book available about this system called Assessing Student Threats, Implementing the Salem-Keizer System. Second edition has a purple spine. Don't get the one with the blue spine. Amazon sells those as well. We can't get them to stop. But second edition has some additional chapters on communicating with victims and the public about threats. This is a pitch for the book, not because the money goes in my pocket. It does not. It goes to our threat prevention teams, and the dollars that are realized in royalties are spent to increase our training so that we can be a resource to all of you. So it's there. Amazon has it. Roman and Littlefield publishes it. It's easy to find. If you have more questions about it, let me know. But it does outline the system pretty well. This is not a training on the model. I just want you to see the perspective I come from when I talk about these 5 takeaways, because I think that's very important. Dan highlighted a few things, like this being an education system, and it's being a system that promotes prevention. It is multidisciplinary. It is highly collaborative. No one person makes a decision in this system. We keep lots of opinions and lots of resources and perspectives. That allows us to check our own bias and check our own mood that day, because we all know that we can be guilty of having bad days and may look on a situation from a different perspective when we're upset already. We can also be too optimistic, so we have to say real about this stuff. It's designed by an educator. We use education language. It is for K-12 education settings. It has most definitely been adapted to higher ed quite successfully. Community colleges and four-year and colleges and universities in the Northwest use this system. It is all about not just the collaborative discussion, but shared ownership and shared responsibility. We like to share our liability and our good intentions with everyone in the community that serves youth. This is a program that includes equity language. We have identified where our equity problems are and are addressing it within our system, but the actual protocols have the language in them for people to use. We use trauma-informed care and trauma-informed strategies, and we look at restorative practice. In other words, this is a program that is prevention-based. It's not a gotcha system. It prevents implicit bias because the language has been stripped of any opportunity to bring it. However, because it is collaborative, we can check each other's bias, and it has several places within the protocol that remind you to check your bias, why you're looking at certain information, and how you're evaluating it, okay? It is expeditious and methodical. Turnaround time is almost immediate to within 2 days, but it follows method, and the method is the expertise, not the person, okay? So the people that run these systems are vehicles, but the method is the expertise. This system is continually upgraded and updated with new information, new data, any new risk factors that are determined important in looking at risk or the potential for harm of self or others.
How do I get from here to there?
How do we get from here to there? What? Did somebody just ask a question? Okay, I think
that might have been a little bit of feedback. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay. It's user-friendly. The language is simple. I've written these questions so that they appeal to about an 8th grade education, all right? And that is not a judgment on anyone, but I live in a town that has a lot of adults who are educated right around the 6th and 8th grade. And I also work with teachers who don't share the vocabulary of psychobabble and edubabble and threat assessment, and I want to make this very user-friendly and understandable. So the terms I'm going to be used today when I talk to you will be somewhat elementary on purpose. They need to be understood, and they cannot be intimidating to people if we're going to do our work, all right? Finally, it is inexpensive. As I said, it's expertise within a protocol driven system. It doesn't require that a lot of experts are trained. And our interventions and strategies, as you will find today in my fifth takeaway, are determined by the level of risk and address the actual risk factors. So we don't really say, well, this is a high-risk kid, therefore we're going to do all these things. We say, these are elements in this student's life that are high risk, and we will now address those elements. So hopefully you can see the difference in that language. One leaves all kinds of opportunity for bias and judgment and categorization and stereotype, including labeling and profiling. The second example is situationally driven. So we'll get to that. We identify the risk factors and we address those accurately, okay? This is an inclusive process. It has to be. We are absolutely positive through the research and my own and others' anecdotal experiences that kids that are included in the school, kids that are maintained within our system, are safer to themselves and us. When we exclude and expel, we lose kids. We also put ourselves at greater risks, So we lose our high schoolers, we lose our middle schoolers when we do that, and we put ourselves at greater risk. This is a system that promotes connection so that when we do include these students, we're able to connect with them and make their experience more meaningful. All right. This is a prevention and early intervention system. It is not a punitive system. It is not a discipline system, and it is not a gotcha system. It is the opposite of school to prison pipeline. This is a system to keep kids out of that pipeline before they get into a pipeline that might lead to arrest. And even if they do, it is a system for retrieving them back, okay? And that goes for kids that are in isolation because of COVID, for mixed use, for hybrid systems. We are all about trying to figure out new ways to reach out, keep track of our kids, and keep connected. Okay. The goal here is that we not only increase our physical safety, but our psychological safety. In its most simple explanation, our school brain is designed to work when we feel comfortable, confident, and low in stress. Our brains cannot learn. Our teachers cannot teach if they're in fear. So the psychological safety disappears, and then our mission, which is to create successful students and successful citizens, is disrupted by that fear. So the system very much looks at that, at psychological safety, and has as a key element that psychological safety. So we're going to go to questions real quick to see if you have any thoughts or questions about this system.
Yep. Thanks, John. We do have one question that came in.
Yeah.
The question is, how do we do this without SROs?
Boy, that's a heavy. So we're all facing that. My district here, I'm currently the interim director again at Salem-Keizer, is reviewing our SRO programs, their value, if we keep them, what we're going to do to keep them, changes that are going to be made. If we don't keep them, how are we going to engage with law enforcement, since we're still going to have 911 calls and child abuse reports. So what I can do to answer this question is that about half, maybe more, of the districts I consult with do not have SRO programs. They have law enforcement within their region. And this system requires law enforcement to be one of the three key agencies that do the assessment. The first is education, the second is public mental health, and the third is law enforcement, which includes juvenile justice and the DA. Okay, so obviously, the preferred way of doing that is to have SROs who are trained in working with youth, who understand that the calling of an SRO is prevention, is mentorship and teaching, and the elimination of arrests within the school if possible. When you have a police officer trained with that perspective, they do very, very well within this model. When you do not, you can get police officers that don't understand the mission of what an SRO would do. They might be road police and they're in only looking for crimes, and they won't understand the prevention elements of behavioral threat assessment. So without an SRO system, At its minimum, this program has to have some sort of, if not formalized, well-defined informal relationship between schools and law enforcement. That can be sheriff's departments or agencies within cities. That relationship would look like having at least a manager, some sort of command level police officer on that community team to interpret and look at the police involvement or the prevention elements police can provide, or criminal investigation if necessary. Obviously, some of these school shootings that have occurred, if they had been discovered a couple days before, would have definitely involved arrests. So having that relationship with a command level police officer who is also trained in threat assessment. The threat assessment organizations are actually fairly heavily populated by police officers within those associations. So this is a known science/art within policing. A slightly better informal to formal relationship would be to have your local agencies or sheriff's department offer 1 or 2 or 3 police officers that are available during the day. They would be probably road or traffic police or detectives. Hopefully, the detectives that do the work for Child Protective Services, and they would be trained in threat assessment. Now, they won't be SROs because you don't have an SRO contract anymore. They won't be housed in your school, but they will be trained in this process, and they would be members of your team. So the school site level team may or may not have a policeman show up to help with the assessment. If they do not, they would at least be available by telephone to advise for 5 to 10 minutes on the case. If you have that basic skeleton of police involvement, then you can use this model to fidelity. It's just not as fleshed out as the model would be if you had an SRO program. We can talk more about that offline, some of you who are finding yourself in a pickle, or at the end if there's time. Was I able to answer that question to your satisfaction, do you think?
Yes, thank you so much, John.
Okay.
And
okay, great.
I think we're okay to
Okay. We'll any other questions, or should we move on?
No other questions yet.
Okay. So the first takeaway is I want to talk about aggression, which is a type of human behavior that is genetically infused into us. It's part of our social histories and our evolution. But I want to make a point, because right now, when kids are at home, you're hearing stories about possibly those kids acting out. And when a parent describes, or a neighbor, or a rumor, or a Facebook post, or Twitter post describes somebody as violent, we want to take pause, and we want to make sure that that is an accurate description as we lend our assistance to the situation. So I'm going to define violent aggression as opposed to garden variety. I hate to say it that way, but garden variety aggression, like fights and slapping and things like that. Okay, so this entire arrow is aggression. What I promise you, if you're an educator, or anybody who works with kids, or if you have a 3-year-old in your house, I promise you, you're going to see this from almost every human being at some point in their development. Okay, from pushing to fighting, you're going to see those kinds of behaviors, and they range from low impact but frequent. Like if you have a 3 or 4-year-old, you get a lot of biting and slapping and pushing. And they move to less frequent but greater impact. All right, hitting with objects, fighting. Those objects might be balsa wood alphabet blocks or pool noodles or what have you, and somebody could get bruised, somebody could get a fat lip or a black eye. But our job is to get these kids out of the practice of using their hands to hurt and start using their words and their diplomacy skills to resolve the conflict before it hurts someone. They don't just show up in kindergarten with those skills now, do they? We've got a lot of kids still fighting in high school. I don't mean to depreciate the impact of fighting, Kids have been fighting since the dawn of time, and we have had our consequences and our means of controlling that. Those are aggressive behaviors. What I don't want you ever to see out of our kids is any of these behaviors up here, above the line of violent aggression. So hopefully you are seeing what I'm talking about. Violent aggression is aggression that causes severe or lethal injury. Someone's going to get hospitalized, head injury, bullet wound, acid in the face, or dead. Fighting can be a moderately aggressive behavior, like when two kids punch each other in the mouth, all the way to a very violent act if students are stomping on heads or bashing heads into concrete. So these are placeholders. Hitting with objects. There's a big difference between a pool noodle and a baseball bat. Throwing objects. There's a big difference between a brick and some sort of a styrofoam something or other in the classroom. And the outcome is severe or lethal injury. So when we look at kids that are misbehaving or being described as out of control, one of the first things we want to do while we're doing our well checks, while we're looking at kids in isolation and wondering if their mental health is deteriorating, is we want to see the point at which their aggression is manifesting itself. And that, if that is within this normal range, that's still something we want to help people with, but the intervention is quite a bit different than it is when it's up here around shooting, stabbing, or beating. All right, so we want to be able to differentiate that. That helps us take the temperature down, because we might be hearing so-and-so in their neighborhood is doing these terrible things, or you might get a call from a counselor or a teacher that says, this kid is so violent. He's really behaving violently at home. Our next question is, tell me what he's doing. And if they say, well, he's just getting in fights with his brother and sister constantly. Has anybody gone to the hospital? What do those fights look like? And that helps us kind of know. It also helps us inform and teach others the same principle, because what we don't want is people, we do not want people labeling kids as violent. That is a very heavy label. To call a kid aggressive is to call him a human being. Yeah, he's aggressive. He's in middle school. She's in middle school. They tend to be aggressive creatures. To say violent, though, little Johnny's a violent person, that lends a much weightier, a much more serious label to little Johnny than just describing him as having some aggressive tendencies or aggressive behavior. The last part of this takeaway is that kids use language that can be violent. Like, two kids are fighting and one of them is losing, and that student starts yelling a violent threat. Why? Because he's losing the fight. He's trying to scare the other kid. He's very emotional, and he says, I'm going to kill you after school. I'm going to stab you. I'm going to shoot you. That's a violent threat. It falls in this higher range as a verbal threat. What we're going to do, though, which will be part of our second and third takeaway, is we're going to determine if there are behavioral indications that he is indeed wanting to kill or severely injure, or if the threat, which is violent, which is a set of violent words, actually matches the behavior, which is fighting. So you can see how students use this extreme language. All that is language. What we're looking at is behavior. We want to know behaviorally what that student is doing, if they're preparing to actually act out violently, or if that was a moment of an emotional catharsis of anger to try to cause fear. Okay, so our first takeaway is this violence continuum. And as I said, many of these things can end up in the violent behavior if they include the intention or the outcome of severely injuring someone. So our second takeaway is to take a look at communications. Now I'm going to cover this one quickly. An inappropriate communication is the kind of communication either in social media, open source, or verbally, or a drawing, or a reference, or some sort of any kind of communicative expression that makes you uncomfortable. It doesn't have to be a direct threat. A direct threat is where somebody says, I'm gonna kill that kid after school today, and I'm gonna do it with a gun. That's pretty direct, right? It can certainly put you at, it can certainly unnerve you when someone says that. But the good news is they've given you their whole plan, and we know exactly what's going on. Other forms of threats are indirect or veiled. So an indirect threat might be something that is ambiguous or unclear. It's tentative, but it still makes you feel unnerved or unsettled. It's something like, I have everything I need to kill everyone at school when I come back in the fall. A veiled threat definitely implies violence. It doesn't clearly threaten it. It's usually characterized again by some vague statements in one of two ways. It's either uncertain about who's going to carry out the threat or who will be the victim. An example of that might be, you may not want to be here on Tuesday afternoon, something terrible is going to happen. So a veiled threat or an indirect threat are still threats. So while you're thinking about kids being secluded, kids that are getting depressed, kids that are tired of their parents and their brothers and sisters, and they start to make these kinds of statements, pay attention to these kinds of statements. The threat assessment isn't discipline. It doesn't follow the code of law that might say, well, it has to be an expressly stated threat in order for us to act on it. They have to actually threaten someone. We're not interested in discipline in the code of law when it comes to threat assessment. We want to know what's behind that communication. Because if someone says, I have everything I need to kill everybody at school, that is an extremely important communication to follow up on. What is it that you have? Why would you think it's necessary? Are you talking about yourself? It leaves open a lot of questions. So as you're thinking about kids and doing well checks and keeping track of them and connected with them through the summer, these kinds of communications are the kinds of communications that I consider more serious. And if we flip this over to suicide prevention, any student that says to you, I'm going to kill myself after school today, gives you a lot of tools to work with immediately in prevention. But a student that says, I don't feel like living, I know that I have the stuff in our house, pills, I know that I have what I need to kill myself if I ever want to, gives you a lot less to work with, yet that's a very powerful indirect statement. So we want to think about this. It's going to lead us to our next takeaway, which is context. Finally, a conditional threat is something like, if I don't get what I want, I'm going to take out everybody in class. If I get an F, I'm going to kill that teacher. Again, something we definitely pay attention to, but we look at behavior as it might be attached to that. Some of the indicators of attack-related behavior, which we'll talk about in our fourth takeaway. An expressive threat is a lot like that first threat. Let's just do this and go back up. An expressive threat is a lot like that first threat. Somebody who's yelling and angry, and much like the kid that was in the fight in the example that I gave a few minutes ago. Okay, so I want that to be our second takeaway. Know your communications, and don't restrict yourself to just looking at the kinds of communications that are clearly threatening about hurting self or others. That's not how this operates. All right, now comes, there it is, the curtain drops. Context and situation. This is the next takeaway, and that is simply put, we do not assess kids. I know in the title I wrote that, assessing youth, but what I really mean, except it was full of alliterations and lots of words if I had used this in the title, what I really mean is that we are assessing situations that students or youth are in. Okay, blah. It's like mashed potatoes saying that, but that's what I'm talking about. We are not going to do a deep emotional drill or mental health evaluation on every kid that we're concerned with who is in a threatening situation. The first thing we're going to do is look at their situation or contextual elements to see if those contain indicators that someone is going to hurt themselves or others. So we're not just looking at the message, all right? In other words, we're not really as interested in what is said. In other words, the statement or the person doesn't pose the threat, but the situation does. The situation the student is in poses the threat. If we remove...
John, your microphone is muted.
How long ago did that happen? Here we go. I don't think I muted me. I think that's you. I'm open on this side. Did you accidentally mute me? Did you accidentally mute me?
I'm hearing it, Dan.
Okay.
I've heard it.
Well, Dan, problem's you. Everybody else
Can't
hear
hear
me?
you.
Dan can't hear me? Kyle, you
I
want to
still
do a
hear you,
quick
John.
check on this? Because my mic is open. It's unmuted. Can the audience hear?
Yes.
Yep, looks
we
like
can.
everyone can hear you.
Okay. Sorry, Dan. I think you've heard this before, so we're just going to leave you out. All right. So in other words, we want to look at situation and context. So just remember this little piece. While you're thinking about these kids and they're saying and doing things and they're feeling pretty darn rowdy right now as the temperatures increase and they're ready to go outside, they're going to get aggressive and they're going to feel full of bravado. We want to know the situation they're in. We know kids. We know they're expressive. They use hyperbole. They use demonstrative language. So do we. What we really want to look at is the context of the situation they're in. So the student that is losing the fight, who says, "I'm so mad at you," or I'm going to kill you after this fight is over. The context of that is that student is losing a fight. If we're to do further investigation, we're not going to run off to that student's mental health right away. That would be an evaluation we could do a little later. Plus, it takes too long to do the evaluation and get it done and get the results. What we want to know immediately is, what do you mean by that? Do you have access to guns? Are you still thinking of that after the fight is over? Or was this a situation where you yelled the threat because you were losing the fight? So context. Situational assessment, not an assessment on the person. Makes a lot of sense. And when you're talking with parents and teachers in the community, it's more palatable to be able to hear to hear that kind of definition. When parents think you're probing into the personal lives and the deep psyche of their kids and themselves, they might get a little bit defensive. But if they understand that what we're doing is looking into this student's situation, the reason why this student might be so angry he would hurt himself or others, or the reason someone might feel defensive and bring a weapon in order to protect themselves, that's all context driven. Is there a threat? Circumstantially, what is the sense of safety of that student? Or is it a revenge situation? Has something been done? So the first part of this slide says the assessment is the unique interactions and dynamics between, and I got to get rid of that word perpetrator. I thought I did. I will. Between the student of concern, the target, and the situation they share. Okay? While you're thinking about kids, while you're doing your well checks, think about situational elements. Those are the easiest to assess, and they're the easiest to intervene with if you have resources. If you do not, we'll talk about that with the fifth takeaway, and that will be how to create resources for kids, especially those in isolation. Okay, now we're going to see if something's going on here. There we go. Okay, the next takeaway is I want to quickly define two different types of aggression. Okay, you're going to be again getting information from people who are describing kids' behavior at home or in the community because they're not in your schools. You don't get to observe this. So one of the things we want to do is differentiate between reactive and targeted aggression. Okay, I'm going to give you real simple explanations. These impulsive, effective, and premeditated and predatory are synonyms, but we're going to talk about reactive and targeted. Remember, I want to use real simple vocabulary. So reactive aggression, I want you to think of a cat that is cornered by a dog, and it is reactively aggressive. It is making a lot of noise. It is screaming threats at that dog because it is looking as big as it can. It's highly reactive. It didn't plan on doing this today. It's very emotional, and it feels under attack. The vast majority of our kids are reactive when they are aggressive. They are in a fight. They are mad at you. You ask them to take out their homework, and they're kind of humiliated because they didn't do it. They don't read as well as you thought they did, and they become reactive because they have adolescent brains that go from A to Z without hitting the alphabet in between. They're like this cat, and if you try to pick up this cat while it's fighting this dog, you're going to get shredded. It's not personal, but you picked up the cat and you get in the way of that aggression. Same thing happens when we're intervening with reactive or highly emotional kids, okay? Don't pick the cat up. Don't confront the kid. At home, if you're coaching parents, help them understand. Give them those toolboxes on how to deal with their kids when their kids are emotional and angry. You do this, counselors and psychologists and social workers and teachers, you're constantly coaching parents on how to de-escalate their kids. And all of that comes into play when we look at reactive aggression, okay? Now, next, we have predatory or targeted aggression. This is extremely rare, and it very often ends up with violence or intended violence, okay? We call it targeted violence. This is a cat not reactively aggressive. This is a cat stalking a bird. It didn't just snap. It's got a plan. It's prepared to do it. It's collecting weaponry, its claws, but it's hidden. Its heart rate is very low, and it's very focused on its target. And every move this cat makes is understandable. It's discernible. It's going down a list of things to do in order to get to its victim, the bird. It has to stay under the radar. It has to know the behavior patterns of the bird, and it has to know where the bird's going to be. So it's been watching birds. As a kitten, it practiced attacking string or laser lights, so it's rehearsed. It has prepared to act out violently, but it is not reactive, and it's going to display attack-related behaviors. You're going to see a plan. You're going to see the justification of killing something, and it's going to be an ongoing justification. There's a continuum between the idea of killing and the actual execution of the act. It's not reactive and emotional. It actually makes sense if that is the goal. It follows this continuum of actions like acquiring weapons and learning where the victims are going to be and building a plan. So again, when you're collecting information, you're looking at, is this violence or just regular aggression? Is it violent aggression or moderate aggression? What kind of communications suggest that? Within the context, are there elements that will tell us that attack-related behavior suggests that this is a predatory targeted act, or is it a student that is highly reactive at home because he just or she just can't take another day with her parents, and she just needs to get out of the house, and the parents are telling her she can't, and now she's pitching a fit, as we used to say. So there's some differentiation, and the parents call you and they want you to help. It's good to get these kind of 4 takeaways figured out so that you know what your next step is going to be, okay? I've given you a research summary in the slides. We're not going to go through this, but these 8 items would be things you would look at that would be attached or associated with attack-related behavior or targeted violence, okay? We were going to do a quick question after that, but you know what I'm thinking is that let me do this 5th takeaway, and then we'll do our questions all at once. Does that work?
That sounds good.
Okay, yeah, because this really, as now that I'm going through the slides, it fits with what I was just saying. So I don't want to break that momentum. Okay, final takeaway. Everything I've talked about is assessment, and it's easy. This is the hardest part. It's intervention and prevention. So I'm going to take about 3 minutes on this slide by reminding you as adults that these items up here on this slide, for the vast majority of you, are really important life situations. If you were to lose any of these, let alone 3 or 4, you're going to experience a pretty rainy day. All right? If you were a kid and you lost your relationship with your parents, your best friends, kids were calling you names, they viewed you as weak and insignificant, your grades were dropping, you didn't see a future, you were in a relationship with another person and that faded, disappeared, and that person is now making fun of you. You don't play sports anymore, or maybe you never did. Those are your inhibitors. Those are the things that as a kid give you meaning: good grades, relationships, friends. If you lose those inhibitors, you don't have a lot to live for. When kids do not have inhibitors, just like the adults that lose these inhibitors in the slide, they are far more prone to drug abuse, dropping out, driving recklessly, behaving recklessly, hurting themselves or hurting others. So the prevention side of this program is plugging inhibitors into kids' lives or adding to the ones they possess. So if they already are in sports, it's giving them more tools to be better at sports. If they're academically inclined, it's helping them move even forward, helping them see a future with a job tied to their academics. If they're not academically inclined, but they want to work or they want to go into a trade, it's making those connections so they have a reason to be part of your institution and they like being there. And the final inhibitor, so again, these are adult inhibitors. The final inhibitor for kids, I've already listed a few, is a connection with a pro-social adult in the school, okay? Not a parent, because that comes and goes like a roller coaster. It is a connection that is meaningful with one pro-social adult. If you identify those kids coming back or that are out of your school right now, and you pick the kids that are absolutely disconnected from all the adults in your school, I highly recommend that you start reaching out to those kids. That is proven in the research. Anecdotally, I can tell you that that has been the most positive and successful intervention within the work that I've done, is just getting a kid connected to an adult. Now, this isn't a disciplinarian. This isn't somebody who says, did you get your homework done? Did you behave yourself? This is someone that says, hey, how'd you do last night? Did you sleep okay? How are you feeling today? Did you get something to eat? Can I help you get something to eat? You look tired. How'd the homework go? Can I help you with your homework? What can I do to make your day better? That's the kind of inhibitor, or if we want to use a more sophisticated term, it's a stabilizer or a protective factor. But again, when we're talking to parents and kids, we want to talk about things like inhibitors, things that inhibit acting out inappropriately and then create connection. Okay, that's the 5th takeaway. That's the real big one right now. I mean, you're going to have kids that are up to doing things. We want to build inhibitors and connections to the degree that our resources in our communities are allowing us to do it. But you know, something that's free are the people that your district are paying right now to reach out and do well check with kids. That's free. It's not free to us, but we don't have to add it to our budget. And they can reach out and connect with these kids. I've listed the management strategies. They are all absolutely intuitive. But as we look into kids that are going to hurt themselves or others, we want to monitor that communication. We want to make sure we know where weapons are, increase supervision. We want to build those relationships, increase our inhibitors, decrease the things that are agitating them, and get our community sources put together in a level 2 team or an advisory team. This is an art form, not a science. Educating kids has always been an art form. I know we talk about data, 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 data. It's all we ever talk about anymore, and it's very important. But the part of this that makes us successful is the artful approach of working with human beings. And I still say that the best teachers use a system of some kind, that it's about how they teach. They might use a fad from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and the aughts, and now the teens. I've seen every one of those fads in teaching math. Kids learned math when teachers knew how to teach what they were using, and they projected that information and made it interesting. The same thing goes with intervention. So the art of that would be these management strategies and building inhibitors. Removal is a last resort. That's only if we have to keep people safe, all right? We need to keep these kids connected. We need to keep them under our lens if we can. Let's jump to questions.
Great, thank you, John. I got one question that came in. How do you get the community support for the level 2 team? What does it look like, and what are you doing? How do you just gather those folks?
I'll tell you how I did it real quick. In '99, as I invited all of those agencies that serve youth to meet, so that'd be law enforcement, public mental health, juvenile justice, protective services, our education service districts, the DA. And I simply said, do you folks think that school violence and school suicide is a school problem? Is it an education school district's problem, or is it everyone's problem? And they all agreed it's everyone's problem. So I had a win. And in the world of sales, which I've never been in, I have heard that if you can get a yes, if you get that yes right away, you're already on the road. So first of all, you gotta measure their belief that it's all of our problem, and then build commitment. And the commitment may be in-kind time donation, or just their ability to help you build the basic skeleton of a community team, which would be oversight. That would mean that those agencies, management and field workers, would sit with the school district personnel, the leadership of the school psychologist, counselor, special ed, or administrator who leads this threat assessment process and suicide prevention process. And they would at least provide oversight and help. If you can get them one step further, then you create an assessment system that allows administrators to bring their cases, the serious cases where they need help, they need further investigation, and they need resources for kids. This team would then allow those administrators to come in and sit and review the case. That's a little more commitment. A lot more commitment is that they actually donate a couple hours a week of a couple members of their agency to actually go to the school with the school district lead and conduct something called a level 2 investigation, which takes the level 1 site team investigation and adds a whole bunch more information, or at least rules out other things people were suspicious of. That it also connects that kid with the community resources. So first thing you do is you get everybody in a room and you find out if they believe it's everyone's problem. The second is you measure their commitment and resources that they can give. Most places are getting pretty good cooperation out of those agencies right now because of the increase in suicide rate and the school shootings and school violence that has occurred within the last 30 years. There's more I can do to help with that. Obviously, it's in the book, and I'm available to problem solve with people if they want to send me emails. All right. Anything else?
Thank you so much.
Well, last but not least, I do just also wanted to make a note that this system is hard copy or electronic copies, but I want to thank PCG because you folks are actually building an electronic version of this and a dashboard that would be web-based that will use the Salem-Keizer model for make sure I get this right, not just threat assessment, but suicide prevention, fire setter assessment, and sexual misconduct. So for those of you out there using the system, know that PCG is going to have a pretty slick, I've seen it, dashboard that will kind of fast track all the portals and really make this user friendly. I think that's all I got. Yeah.
Just wanted to do a quick shout out here. Thank you to Daniel Wisman and Richard Purcell for kind of putting this whole forum together. Again, this is the third of our 6-part series. I've had a lot of folks ask to be added to the list. I believe I've gotten everyone who's reached out, but if you are interested in getting the slide deck and kind of getting added to the rest of our sessions, please feel free to reach out to me. You can do so in the chat or kbishop@pcgus.com. John, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for jumping on today.